protests have ranged Thank you, and pardon me. Thank you. Here we will engage, at this conference, we will engage the strategies of the protesters as well as the manner of pacification or resolutions adopted by the government. It is apparent that the threats of the pandemic notwithstanding, dominant political, racial, sociological, and psychological tempers in other parts of the world rose and metamorphosed into stylized global movements. In the year 2020, this is yet to stop. As of the month of September 2020, the Global Protest Tracker, enabled by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, recorded 230 protests globally. And over 25 of these protests have been directly related to the coronavirus. Another instance that we can see are the African-centered global responses to police brutality in the United States of America that spurred the #Black Lives Matter and the #EndSARS movement in Nigeria and beyond. Protests enhanced by digital communicative competences and non-violent performative tactics are urgent fronts used as non-strategic violent action for the radicals and for the moderates. Africa, Japan, and the entire world have become urgent upon this tool of reform, be it against anti-nuclear cause, resistance to police brutality, persistent bad governance, and in many ways, the diverse protests are also forms of expression of fear and insecurity. The cumulative sociological and economic impact of the community lockdowns in escalating movements across national and continental borders are being investigated in this year's conference. Japan, having conducted these highly successful rallies, demonstrations, blockades, and even forms of involutions remain the core of this conference. The former ambassador of Japan to Nigeria, His Excellency Ambassador Yutaka Kikuta, and His Excellency Ambassador Matsunaga Kazuyoshi have
We would like to apologize for the glitch there. The president still on her speech, but you can all see these are issues that justify the preponderance of the protests, especially on the African continent, we're still struggling to have the basic facilities provided by the institutions charged with the responsibilities. But as individuals, institutions, and scholars, we try as much as possible to ensure that we do a little bit. And because scholarship and knowledge production constitute another form of show, it must go on. And that's exactly why we are making efforts as much as possible to see that we progress with what we are doing at the moment. While still waiting to hear from the technical section, technical department, I was wondering whether we could can the technical department assure us we need some sort of signal or response from them on whether the president is able to come back immediately or not?
Yes, the president is rejoining now.
Okay, please.
Yes.
All right, we'd like to encourage everyone to stay tuned. Thank you very much. Madam President still has the floor.
Okay, the president is back now.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Really sorry about this. Okay, so I was on the fact that the efforts of the Japanese government has been appreciated, but for the cultural and bilateral relations which this association represents to continue to increase, there should be more consideration for the growth of Japanese studies and culture in Nigeria. The paucity of funds and financial constraints globally have also had severe effects on scholarship and affected the conference support and publications. If not, we would have had more participation at this conference and more presentations as well. So we look forward to more financial interventions from the Japanese embassy and government from now onwards. I would like to once again appreciate His Excellency, Ambassador Matsunaga Kazuyoshi, the new Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Japan to the Federal Republic of Nigeria for gracing this occasion. And I would like to recognize Her Excellency too, Nami-san, she's here with us, as well as Professor Adeshina Afolayan, who is our keynote speaker, the acting Vice Chancellor of the University of Ibadan, who is also host of the African Association for Japanese Studies, Professor Adibola Ekola, all my senior colleagues present, members of AAJS, the executives, colleagues and great friends of the African Association for Japanese Studies. I welcome all the participants and paper presenters once again to the 4th African Association for Japanese Studies Conference. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Madam President, for that warm welcome and for setting the tone in your address regarding our focus and direction at this conference this year. Having said that, I would like to invite the second leg of the welcome speech to be delivered by Ambassador Matsunga Kazuyoshi, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Japan to Nigeria. Your Excellency, you have the floor. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Please, the ambassador's speech is booked ready. The ambassador will join us later, so we have to proceed with the next thing on the agenda for now.
All right, the next thing on the agenda is the citation of the keynote speaker. It will be read by Dr. Tolulokpe Ibikunle. You have the floor, sir.
Good morning. I'm so excited to be here, and it's a great privilege to be reading the citation of Professor Adesina Afolayan. Professor Adesina Afolayan had a bachelor's degree, master's degree, and PhD in philosophy from the University of Ibadan. His master's thesis is titled Development and Imperative of Cultural Exchange, while his PhD dissertation is titled Social Identity, Democracy, and the Idea of the Nation State. Professor Afolayan teaches philosophy at the University of Ibadan, Nigeria. His area of specialization include philosophy of politics, cultural studies, African philosophy, and philosophy of modernity. He is the editor of Uttering Nollywood 2014, a co-editor of Palgrave Handbook of African Philosophy 2017, the author of Philosophy and National Development in Nigeria 2018, a co-editor of Indigenous 20, co-editor of Pathways and Alternative Epistemologies of Africa 2021, editor of Identities, Histories, and Values. For the Department of Philosophy, University of Ibadan, Professor Afolayan was staff librarian between 2007 to 2015, coordinator General Studies Program 2007 to 2015, examination officer 2015 till date. And for the Faculty of Arts, University of Ibadan, he was sub-dean postgraduate between 2018 to 2020. He is associate editor, African Philosophical Inquiries, member editorial board, International Review of Politics and Development, business editor, Yoruba Studies Review, consulting editor, the Kwasu International Journal of Arts. Also, Professor Adesina Afolayan is a member Philosopher Association of Nigeria, member African Literature Association. Professor Afolayan has monographs, over 10 books publications, over 27 chapters in books, over 30 essays in peer-reviewed journals. He has also delivered lectures in several local and international conferences. I present to you Professor Adesina Afolayan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tolulokpe, for that brilliant delivery of the citation of course, our own extremely brilliant Professor Adesina Afolayan. The keynote speech will now be delivered by our own Professor of Philosophy of Culture and Development. And I am sure it will open, because it's a keynote. If it's a keynote, then it must open the floor. So then it's going to open the floor to the discourse today on protest, communication and performance, pre-COVID-19, COVID-19 and post-COVID-19 tempers. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes,
yes, we can.
Thank you very much, my brother. I want to appreciate you. Let me observe all protocol. I want to sincerely appreciate the Japanese ambassador to Nigeria. I want to appreciate my brother, Dr. Olaoluwa Senayo. I also want to especially appreciate my friend of many years, Dr. Doyin Agoru. Let me say that for me, Dr. Agoru is a very courageous scholar. And she's courageous because doing Japanese studies in Nigeria takes courage. And it takes courage essentially because the way we do intellectual and academic studies, it has this insular modality where people in the Institute of African Studies are not, conversing with people in African philosophy. People in English are not talking with people in linguistics, and on and on. It's as if all of us are boxed in our academic and intellectual corners. But to have somebody like Dr. Agoru, championing Japanese studies takes extreme courage, and I sincerely want to appreciate what she's doing. Bringing Japanese studies, African studies, European studies, and all this together is a very beautiful way that we can facilitate the conversation of mankind, of humankind. This has already started in African philosophy, for instance, where epistemic formations in Asian, Africana, and other diasporic studies are already taking place. And I am very glad that my friend is already also charting the path, for Japanese studies to join, this collaborative interaction. I want to sincerely appreciate you for inviting me to give this keynote address. The theme for this 4th annual conference for me is very significant and timely. And it is timely and significant for two major reasons. The first one is the comparative advantage that it gives us to be able to derive conceptual and experiential insights, across Nigeria and Japan. Immediately I saw the topic, the theme for this conference, the historical experience of Japan, especially with the Meiji Restoration of 1868, and the impact that this revolutionary event had on the cultural and political transformation is so very key, and it gives us the comparative tool by which we can begin to see how one culture, how one nation state can begin to benefit from another one. So for me, for instance, we can ask what lesson the world and Nigeria, for instance, can learn from the charter oaths developed by the leaders of the Restoration, and especially the commitment of that charter to public discussion, deliberative assemblies. These are two issues for me, as we're going to see shortly in this lecture. These are two critical issues that brings philosophy and democracy into serious conversation. How does, for instance, public discussion and deliberative assemblies that the leaders of the Meiji Restoration of 1868 lead us into the formation of an active citizenship? So in that regard, this theme is very significant. The second reason why it is significant for me is that the new normal that the COVID-19 pandemic is bringing to the fore enabled us to ask again, at least now with some more urgency, the fundamental central questions of political philosophy. And that fundamental question is, how do humans organize their societies in ways that will facilitate human flourishing? Once we interject the pandemic and the scourge of that pandemic into that question, we immediately begin to see how significant it becomes. And I'm hoping that with all the brilliant papers that I've already seen on the lineup for this conference, we'll be able to contribute insights that African studies experts, that philosophers in Africa can begin to chew upon, on how across the world, how in post-colonial Nigeria, for instance, we can begin to think about how we can organize the human society and the role specifically that protest plays in such an organizing of a democratic society. So one more time, permit me to sincerely appreciate Dr. Doyin Agboru for this beautiful, beautiful opportunity. The title that I will be speaking to is a very simple one: Philosophy as Protest in a COVID and post-COVID Nigeria. Philosophy as Protest in a COVID and a post-COVID Nigeria. And my simple objective is simply to see how philosophy enables us to think more and think better about democratic experiments anywhere in the world, and especially in Nigeria. What are the insights that we can benefit from a philosophical exploration of the challenges that philosophy or that democracy faces, and of specifically the role of protests in making our democratic experiment much more better. And I want to start by, saying that in the march of humans, let's call it the march of civilization and modernity, we seem to have arrived at a point where human complacency have led, quite paradoxical to the objective of civilization and modernity, to the attenuation of our social order. The aim of civilization and modernity is meant to concretize human achievements and to bring social order and social harmony to bear on the way we relate with one another. But the more we march forward, the more we modernize, the more it seems that we are also at the verge of destroying our world. There are so many, for instance, so many theories as to how the coronavirus surfaced in the first instance. For some, it was something that was hatched in some laboratory somewhere, and it escaped. For some others, it is the result of human disregard for the natural order, and that made it possible for this virus to jump species and to invest humanity. So thinking about our world becomes very, very significant. Thinking especially about how we can organize ourselves in a way that we will not be subject to our own complacence, in a way that we will not be subject to our own failure or our own respect for what can make us better humans. And this is where democracy surfaces, democracy that we have taken for granted as the best form of government. Over the years, people are now talking about what is called democratic recession. And this is because all across the world, democracy is in rapid decline. As somebody, some authors have titled it, democracy is dying, starting with the election of Donald Trump in the United States, Viktor Orban in Hungary, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, and other governments across the world. We now have democratic government morphing dangerously into several populist and authoritarian variants that makes the world a very dangerous place. And I cast a question mark on whether democracy is able to allow us, attend to that fundamental question of how we can organize ourselves in a way that will allow individuals to flourish. Democracies across the world now perform authoritarianism and populism in ways that challenges all we think we know about government, what ought to be government relationship with the governed. And as we know now, bumbling, whether we like it or not, whether we know it or not, bumbling populism kills. The COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated to us how elected government across the world, from Donald Trump in the United States to the United Kingdom, government now puts their citizen in what Giorgio Agamben calls the zone of exception. The zone of exception is a space where citizens can die while their government play bad politics. Where government are concerned with some other things. In the United States, it is a disregard for science. In Africa, it is a disregard for the life of the citizens. And so we have the coronavirus killing millions and millions of people because the government simply does not just care about what happened to their citizens. And so therefore, this is where the issue of protests becomes very, very, very significant as a democratic imperative. From Tiananmen to Tahrir Square, and from the EndSARS to the Black Lives Matter protest, the health of our democracies has always depended on the capacity of the citizen to call their government to responsiveness, to transparency, and to accountability. But protest is also a double-edged sword that could either be a legitimizing instrument deployed by an authoritarian government, as well as being a means by which the people makes democratic statements. So the question that I believe that our esteemed contributors are going to be throwing on the table for this conference, this unique conference, is how we can begin to draw comparative advantages from instances of protest all across the world, from Japan to Nigeria, and see how we can derive insights into how protest can sincerely become a tool by which we can better our democracy. Now, that becomes very, very important because across the world, there's always been a conflict, a struggle, as it were, between what we can call constituted power, the power that is founded on the Constitution, and the Constitution as a means by which we stabilize the polity on the one hand, and what we call constituent forces. So while constituted power is a supreme authority that monitors political boundaries and demand allegiance from subordinated subjects, constituent forces, on the other hand, are those democratic forces of social transformation. They are the means by which humans, according to Michael Hart, make their own history. So, in this struggle between the constituted power and its coercive sovereignty, And the people, on the other hand, as the constituent forces, we have a struggle that within which the constituted power has always triumphed. And we have several examples to prove that. The Arab Spring, for me, is the most recent one. And within that, whatever people have said about it, however people have theorized it, we discover that the people invaded the public space. But in the final analysis, what do we have? Do we have the devolution of freedom and authority to the people? Or do we have the replacement of one constituted power by another? Don't we have the removal of Mubarak to be replaced by El-Sisi, all still in the attempt to police human behavior and human affairs? So the simple question I want to ask in this place is, to what extent can philosophy and philosophical inquiry enable us to break what we call the dilemma of democratic constitutionalism? That dilemma is very simple. Can those who have democratic power to make a constitution, you know, the famous "we the people" that starts every constitution across the world, can these people who have this democratic power to make a constitution do so effectively without surrendering that democratic authority to the cohesive sovereignty of the state? That is the question that I want to throw on the table within the context of this beautiful, wonderful conference. In what way can the people begin to assert their democratic sovereignty vis-a-vis the cohesive sovereignty of the state that is meant to consistently put the people under subjection rather than allow them to process their freedom, process their authority, and the best means by which they want to organize themselves and therefore to flourish within the context of the state. Very quickly, I'll be taking my clue from Friedrich Nietzsche's advice in his 1888 book titled The Twilight of the Idols. The subtopic, the subtitle for that book is How to Philosophize with a Hammer. How to Philosophize with a Hammer. Nietzsche takes up the hammer to sound out all sorts of philosophical and political idols and then to smash them into pieces. So with the hammer, we invite the philosopher into the public realm with a dual intention. The hammer is meant for a deconstructive and a reconstructive purpose. And the intention, therefore, is that all that, even as students of democracy, students of social order, all that we ever hold dear, all that we have ever taken for granted, especially within the context of our democratic experiments. So when we invite the philosopher into the public sphere, his intention is very straightforward. It is to sound out our most cherished beliefs, presumptions, and assumptions, and to not only pull them down, but to also begin to rebuild them into life-affirming worldviews and effective strategies by which we can keep up, our interrogation of how best to live in the human society. So it is at this point that Nietzsche agrees with that famous Karl Marx quote: philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change the world. So by bringing the philosopher into the public sphere with other citizens, because the philosopher himself or herself is also a citizen, we are philosophizing with a hammer. And philosophizing with a hammer in a democracy therefore implies demanding a paradigmatic shift in democratic narrative that has kept us bound for so many years. We simply just take democracy for granted rather than scrutinizing some of its assumptions and some of its presumptions. Now, one of those that I would like to query within this short period that I have is a very simple one in the form of a question. Can we always expect citizens who are passive spectators to always make the transition to active participants when the need arises? This question resonates more within the context of post-colonial Nigeria, where poverty and the electoral experiences of people already forecloses their participation, their active participation within the public sphere. So the issue is, in what way can we expect that people who just want to passively watch what is going on make that crucial transition to becoming active citizens who must demand that those who govern them very well? This is the issue that I want to quickly speak to. By stepping into the public sphere, the philosopher is also a citizen who is interested in the flourishing of the state. And the step into that public sphere becomes a metaphor by which we query that significant concept that is central to democratic theory, the demos. That the concept of the people is a concept we all take for granted. So the question is, who and what are the people? How do we begin to reconceive and rethink, rehabilitate the concept of the demos in a way that will enable us to separate between the masses on the one hand and the active citizens on the other hand? It is the concept of the masses when they rejected democracy. Post-colonial Nigeria is, how do we make that shift away from the uncritical masses who just want to be passive spectators, and refuse to make input into how their life and their destiny are ordered, and the active citizenry armed with a competent exercise of their mental and moral capacities, and who can freely exercise their reason in ways that do not make them answer to any other authority but themselves. This is the fundamental essence of what we call democratic sovereignty. And so this shift, and this is the idea I want to throw on the table. This is the idea that I'm hoping that our illustrious contributors to these participants at this occasion will be able to look at, will be able to analyze, and will be able to supply some further answers, some further queries. How do we shift the idea of the demos as an ontological understanding has been to the idea of the demos as performance. The people are significant in democracy, but the people who are significant are the people who are what they do and not who they are. That is my query. The people as what they do rather than what they are. How can the people perform their demotic essence for the sake of the public good? So where we are headed, we can just pass. Can you hear me? Am I still on?
Yes, we can hear you, sir.
Thank you very much. So I was saying that we need to make a shift from the people as a passive recipient of all the bad politics of the government, the people as those who are easily manipulated by the politician, the unscrupulous politicians, and begin to see the emergence of an active citizenry that is defined not by who they are as citizens, but by what they do with their reason. Once we have this set of citizens invading the public sphere, like the philosopher who is also stepping into the public sphere, then we begin to get an insight into why, for instance, in the Meiji Restoration, the government saw the significance of why public discussion and deliberative assembly is very crucial to how we determine the public good and how the public good can make the well-being and the welfare of the people, of the citizen, very, very, very significant. So how do we undermine apathy? How do we translate into a very, very performative understanding of who the people are and what they are able to do? This brings the idea of protest into a different kind of understanding. Democracy requires communities of ideas rather than just a set of procedures and institutions like election. So every 4 years, Nigerians go to the poll, elect their leaders, and then they go back to sleep, and then allow the leadership to begin to inscribe on their life and on their body all manner of policies that make life difficult. But you see, which is what the leaders of the Meiji Restoration recognized. There must be philosophy that we are asking to step into the public sphere, calls for a deliberative model of democracy within which public reason plays a significant role in the determination of the performativity of the active citizen. So, since the idea of the public good is not something that answers to a universal definition, then understanding its meaning for human flourishing leads to several contestations. It leads to protests. It leads to the active citizens of specific contests, demos as agents, constantly involving themselves in asking the question, what are we to do? How are we to do it? So this question of what we are to do is what must motivate protest. And protest within the context of each city-state, within the context of each state anywhere in the world, either Japan or Nigeria or the United States or Hungary or Romania, will now depend on the way the active citizens of each of these states define what their public good is. And this is what brings the philosopher's hammer down very, very hard on our assumptions and presumptions about what constitutes the good life for the citizens of any state. So I hope that in our attempts to make that transition from just being a passive masses of people who want the government to just inscribe terrible policies and politics on their body, we want to be able to make that move to seeing the demos as agents and as performance, and allow that performativity to be the sole basis by which we can begin to orient protest in whatever form. I want to thank you so much for this opportunity to be able to speak to this August occasion. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you very much, Professor Adeshina. Yeah, I mean, we didn't expect anything less than this. And of course, the professor has more than met our expectations. That is what happens when you bring the philosophers into a discourse that everybody considers to be ordinary. You just discover that it is not ordinary because before you know it, the professor has come with a hammer. And so we now have to work with the hammer, because he's philosophized with a hammer, metaphorically, to challenge our generally docile and passive psychology, to become alive to the challenges and the demands of the times, and to demand, as it were, good life. Because in the end, philosophy, whether it is aesthetics, whether it is ethics, whether it is epistemology, is aimed at one thing. Whether it is existentialism, you see, at the bottom line is good life. Can you make meaning of life? How do you make meaning of life? How does life become good, beautiful? And here we have just discovered that beyond the constituted powers, those of us that constitute the subordinated selves or groups or individuals have to realize that governance, or if you like, the global attempt to institutionalize democracy, is not only about those constituted authorities, because it has got at least two ends. It's a spectrum. These constituted authorities are naturally tempted to be absolute in their performance of power. But we constitute the mass, if you like, but that mass has to be a critical mass. So the question is, and which is the core of my own takeaway, is how do we transform a largely passive citizenry in Africa to an active category to ultimately take over, assume agency in the public sphere to mediate development, so that we are able to check the excesses of those instances of democracy that are even worse than fascism, whether in America, in Japan, in Nigeria, in Cote d'Ivoire, in Ghana, in even Rwanda. How do we go about this? But where the critical mass is an insignificant fraction, we run into a problem. And so we are all guilty as charged. It's not enough to just stay back and lament. The onus is on us to galvanize and mobilize a great mass of people, reorient ourselves, and know that we can only have the desired dividends of democracy across Africa when the ordinary subordinated groups are able to assume agency to regulate the performance of power. Professor Adesina, we would like to thank you once again for this philosophical dimension to this year's edition of the conference. I am very sure that even when, by their nature, keynote addresses invest what a professor has called discursive authority on the speakers, we will still be able to take 1 or 2 questions so we can be better educated on this matter, and there would also be room for comments. So at this stage, we would like to welcome comments and questions to bring this session to a credible close. Once again, we'd like to thank you, sir. And now the floor is open to everyone. Questions, please. You can raise up your hand. You can type your questions. Let's go there. Well, while still waiting for your questions, I would like to find out from our keynote speaker how we can go or combine those assumptions, those philosophical assumptions geared towards attaining good democracy, attaining good life, to speak in the language of philosophers. How do we achieve all this by combining these theoretical and philosophical assumptions with those epistemological forms of understanding in Africa? You know, some sort of what happens when we name a child Oguntoyinbo, the Friedrich Nietzsche's and all these other ones definitely have made statements that also have parallels. How do we, in Africa, how do we galvanize those mobilize those parallels, even if in most cases we do not immediately have names that we can attribute to them? Those proverbs, those adages are also philosophical in themselves. How do we align them towards this transformation that can also come via the agency of protest? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Let me. You see, there is a temptation that we must all resist, and this is a temptation that I myself have fallen into quite a few times, especially in an attempt to theorize the status of the demos. There is the tendency that one could become cynical about the possibility that the demos can achieve effective democratic transformation. And all you just need to do is just look around. The other day, I was reading about the protest that was jump-started by Mohamed Bouazizi, that man that's self-immolated in Tunisia, that set off the chain of events culminating in the Arab Spring. And some few years down the line, countrymen and women were already very livid about how the changes that they presupposed was going to happen as a result of Bouazizi dying has made their situation worse than what they thought. And so the memory of that guy has now gone into disrepute. And so that brings that question back, and you ask that question also. Though the critical mass of people are so small and sometimes insignificant, but you see, in the history of ideas, in the history of social change and transformation, sometimes that transformation owes its efficiency and effectiveness to this few set of people. And so it simply means that there must be some kind of all hands on deck, some kind of networking, critical networking in the public sphere, where the intellectual can begin to align with the mass media, and not the mass media the way we know it. There is a concept of public journalism that is very, very critical. And public journalism has a whole lot to do with the concept of public deliberation that I'm talking about here. Meaning that from intellectual to public journalists, we can begin to have sets of people who set the tone for public discussion, for public deliberation, for public engagement that also spills over into the social media. Now, our social media now is about savage responses, is about laughter, is about sarcasm. But you see, the social media can be weaponized into a very significant public sphere where people actively participate in the understanding of what democracy means and how democracy can be domesticated within the context of post-colonialism. So this is one of the ways to go to begin to see how through significant discussion, significant deliberation, people can begin to see the effect of how we can talk and participate in the transformation of how our lives can be better. So it is not, I assure you, sir, it is not something that can occur overnight. It took Voltaire, Diderot, Rousseau, and all these philosophers in the 17th, 18th century. It took them a long while to, consistently impinge on the consciousness of the public before the French Revolution was achieved. So maybe we have started, maybe we are yet to start in Nigeria, but if we have such a forum where we have intellectuals and scholars and academics discussing issues like this, maybe one day we will get there.
Thank you very much, Professor Adesina, which means, and this is very critical, the public sphere is not one, unorganized, awkward mobilization of people. It is about what I'll call, a kind of conscious governance of the public sphere through an identification of the pyramids of networks that will work in such a way that will achieve the social transformation, and which also means that, like he began with, we also have to engage the discourse of protest, keeping in mind the contradictions of it, because there are limits of protest, and it is in our being able to moderate and govern this well that we can attain the transformation we all desire. Mr. Bartholomew or Professor Akpa, you have the floor. Let's go.
Thank you, sir. And I want to start by appreciating the convener for this conference. And also appreciate Professor Afolayan for that wonderful stimulation. And I want to begin by raising some issues here, because I think the focus of this discourse is on protest. But then I also want to draw our attention to what I see as deceptive protest, because you realize that in Nigeria today, and perhaps in most African countries, sometimes I raise the issue of what becomes the fate of the passive citizens, especially against the backdrop of the SY or previously assumed Marxist advocate, who unfortunately, when given the opportunity to remedy the situation, turns out to be another agent of oppression. I know that Professor Afolayan raised the issue of public journalism as, of course, active agents towards remedying the situation. But of course, we all know that the journalism that we have today are also colored in a way, and unfortunately too, with political undertones. You know, a lot of these are big politicians, owners of these mainstream media. And you realize that most times they are not truthful, especially on the side of the masses. I think these are also some of the issues that are very, very pertinent that we should consider why we'll look into these issues of protest as against the masses and, of course, the coercive authority of the ruling class. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bartholomew. Prof, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Akpa. You've raised some pertinent issue. And you see, the issue for me here is simple. The journalism, and I'm just taking that as one element in the transformation that we are talking about. The kind of journalism practiced in Nigeria as of today is only traditional. It is traditional in the sense of journalists trying to present reality as it is, okay? But you see, there must be a shift, and you know, presenting reality as it is comes with a whole lot of problem. Issues of objectivity, whether there's anything called objectivity anywhere, and on and on. But the issue for me is, to what extent can we transform into a civic journalism that sets the tone and the pace for democratic deliberation? That is the core of the need for traditional journalism to transit into civic journalism. In Nigeria today, maybe you can point at the Sahara Reporters and the Premium Times, but even at that, there are so many people who have genuine problems with the way even the Sahara Reporters, you know, present what they consider to be facts. Okay, so a whole lot still needs to be done to be able to bring journalism up to par with democratic expectations in Nigeria. We are not there yet. A whole lot needs to be done to be able to find a way of doing democratic deliberation on social media, which is our reality now. But we are still not there. So I agree with you. Politicians have a way of hijacking democratic intent. Yes. People that we call influencer mobilizers also have a way of being brought under the sway of the powerful in the society. Yes. But you see, these are dangers. These are challenges that we cannot wish away. These are challenges that we must have to deal with. Look at protests and revolutions across the world from history, and you will discover that, number one, you always have the vanguard there, okay? And number two, you always have that danger of, the either peaceful, legitimate protest degenerating into something else. There was the reign of terror that accompanied the French Revolution. There was not anything they could do. That is why people who say they want revolutions cannot always predict how the revolution will end. Revolution is not something you plan. Sometimes revolution is so as spontaneous as it could be, okay? You do not always know the end. So sometimes it's not just sufficient to say, we don't want this system again. Let's just, revolution now, to quote that famous slogan. Because at the end of the day, you might not be able to say you have achieved the goal that's generated the revolution in the first place. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. And on that note, everybody will remember that we had the genuine protesters last year on NSAS. And then what happened in the end? The hoodlums also joined to discredit it. And in the end, it was a well-intentioned movement that was ultimately blackmailed. There are more hands up. Lambert Ngiap, you have the floor, and after you, it will be Charles Akinshete. So, Lambert, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir, Mr. Moderator, and thank you, Professor Adeshina Afolayan. It's my pleasure to have met you, and you've spoken very soundly on this subject. Basically, a keynote that is going to galvanize our proceedings, especially tomorrow. Right now, I just want to attempt, to maybe provide a scope of thinking to your rhetoric question of, situating the problem of how we can be able to get the masses become critical in participation to provide for a better way of constituting our governance. So, in this light, I just want to invite
her hair. You want to go with her to do her hair? Are you going to be able to use the same system that?
Somebody should quickly mute themselves so we can hear this better. You have the floor. Continue, sir.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Actually, I want the reflection is to be able to provide a sense of thinking within a scope to think about the society in concentric circles, where, if you can picture it, from the innermost circle would have to represent the individual, because you have firmly stated that the individual is part of the institution. And of course, the individual is part of the larger community or the society. So within this, interpretation of our world of reality, let's look at the most innermost circle as the individual. And then as it expands outwardly, we should see the institution. And then beyond the institution, we see the wider society, which constitutes the masses. So in the question as to how a passive individual becomes, capable of becoming active and recognized as somebody capable of, of participating in the constitutional, force, let's imagine what has to be done with the individual. And we are actually saying that the processes of change has to be such that it is inviting to the individual to, make known of what he can do, not rather what he is or yes, by participating at the most local level. So we should be looking at a system which is building itself from the most local level before thinking about how it emerges into the national, system of society. So let's think about even our most basic community settings at the villages, for example. How do we constitute power and governance and the society at that very, very, simple level? So who are those that come into the role of governance? Because at the village level or the community level, we're able to know everybody. So we should be able to identify only people who can participate in processes of development, through a show of certain traits in their character as being trustworthy, as being, assiduous, as being capable intellectually, and willing to be able to participate in rendering service for their society. Such people and such qualities should be the reasons why in an organized democratic election, without any form of electioneering, because it would not have to be, for them to come to show what they are by some means of, propaganda and campaign. No, but in such, arenas of election, it should be rather a process of, secretly choosing such individuals as our choice of leaders. And then a vote is counted without any forms of elections. And then they are brought into, such people are now brought into a call for commitment, and then they would continue to provide their service as institutions. And if this is what is happening, then from the masses, more people are going to step down to work as individuals, to be of contribution to society, and then they would be recognized, within the large framework. And so it goes on and on within the educational system and so on. We would be able to pull from that greater society more and more into the critical mass of people who want to participate. So I don't know, this is a little more like theory, but I don't know if it provides, a sense of thinking. And I hope to speak more on some other issues tomorrow when I do my presentation. Thank you very much.
Oh, great. Thank you very much, Professor Ongayab. I consider this more of a comment than, but of course I know Professor Adesina will still respond to this, but because we are also conscious of time, I would like to, at this stage, without performing any constituted authority, say that let's take 2 more questions before Prof will respond, so we save time. So Dr. Charles, you have the floor, and after you, it will be June, and then Prof can address all of them together. I would like to thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, our distinguished moderator. So nice to see you, Dr. And over to Prof. I want to first of all commend your extraordinary presentation. I am quite intrigued, and thank you for setting the pace against tomorrow's discourse. First, let me quickly, in quotes, challenge you on one very fascinating thing you mentioned, and that has to do with the death of democracy. When you were listing examples across the world, Hungary, US, and Brazil, I was hoping that you're going to mention Nigeria, or something, and you didn't. So it's, and I was wondering, is Prof afraid or? Well, anyway, I just want to put this to you from a philosophical perspective. Was the EndSARS movement a complete failure? Secondly, the discourse of protests. Are we not in an era of a kind of post-protest in which, the oppressive institutions now, according to your presentation, have also developed a kind of, barrier, against the protests or against the modes of protests. And it appears that they are succeeding. I'll give you 2 examples. One,
Thank you very much, Dr. Kinshete. Let me just warn you that philosophers don't answer yes or no. When you put when you put a yes or no question before a philosopher, well, I'm afraid,
and then I will protest.
You may be the one to answer that later. June Gbadamosi, you have the floor. Let's have you.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. And it's a tough call, really, and I really want to appreciate Professor Afolayan for his presentation, and I've been able to learn another angle, about these tempers, our democracy, the post-protest, and the issues that can eventually crop up as a result of all our experiences. I don't really have a question, but I really want to come out and say something about it, because I actually have a paper I'm working on, and your presentation has given a new insight into how I'm going to develop the work. Thank you so much.
Oh, you have merely come to play politics with Prof. Never mind. When you're done with the paper, just send it to him and you see how you tear it apart. And then you know that you are just starting. So don't smuggle his name in. Make sure you apply the concepts very well to a scientific conclusion. Otherwise, he's going to deny you. Alade Julius, you have the floor, and then Prof will respond. Alade Julius, you have the floor, please. Hello. Hello. Well, we're still waiting for Alade Julius. Prof, we would like to have you again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my brother. Let me start with Professor Ngia, Professor Lambert. I really like that idea of the concentric circle. I like it. And it gives us some kind of leeway by which we can begin to revisit the structure of the human society that can, in the final analysis, be the sources of social change for us. If you recall, sir, most of the great philosophers, let's take Aristotle, take the family to be the first step in any attempt to begin to think about the society. And that is significant. Being the first agent of socialization, it simply means that the family holds a very unique place, possibly as that first circle in that, concentric sets of circle that we have, where we can begin to speak to the mind and the soul and the capacities of the individual that we talk about. So it is at that point that we can begin to outline the future of the human society if the family is taking its responsibility very, very significantly. And so we can begin to now factor that idea you just threw into the mix. We can then begin to now factor it into how it can enable us to begin to make that transition. So we can talk of the family, we can talk of the system of education. That is another level where a whole lot needs to be done. You see, most of the time when I walk on the road, when I drive, and I see schools promising French curriculum, English curriculum, British curriculum, Montessori kind of dynamics. It sets me thinking that within our context, everything is extroverted. People prefer the Montessori kind of education without the understanding that this is an educational framework and dynamics that was molded within a different context. Okay, but that is what sells, and that is what you are going to see advertised. Okay, so it's a whole lot of things that we have to wrap our head around about. But you see, at a theoretical level, what you have just given us is a very, very wonderful way of thinking about the issue. Thank you very much. Dr. Akinshete, my brother.
Thank you, Professor.
Is the EndSARS a complete failure? No, no. You see, let me share an anecdote. I think somebody, a white guy, an American, I think, was so exasperated one day, and he says, "You people, don't you protest?" You know, he was talking about Nigeria. I mean, they read our news, they read all those things, and the guy was shocked. How can you take this thing? How can you just be so? Now, if you take it at that level, you can begin to go far back, you know, to have a trajectory of how we have what we have now. You can begin to see the trajectory of British colonization and decolonization in West Africa, for instance. Compare it with the Belgian Congo, compare it with the Francophone, you know, countries, compare it with North Africa, and you will see that the anti-colonial process that led to independence in West Africa was a benign one. It was not one that left us any room for active protests. The colonial leaders will go to London for conferences, constitutional conferences. And if you have read The Trouble with Nigeria and some other analysis of, you know, the Nigerian nationalists, you will begin to have a change of view about how we venerate them. In fact, there was a colonial statement, a colonial memo that a colonial officer sent to Britain, and in it, he said, "We want what they want." It was as if there was some kind of collusion between the Nigerian nationalists and the colonialists, you know, to transit power in a peaceful way. That is not what you have in colonial Algeria, where Frantz Fanon and the rest of them had to struggle for power, where, you know, people like Patrice Lumumba and the rest of them had to fight. But the good thing is that sooner or later, a people that is oppressed will have to, one way or the other, is either they will die in that oppression or they will begin to get their hearts together. That is the way I'm going to see not just the EndSARS, but the fuel subsidy thing earlier on, that gradually the citizenry in Nigeria is becoming politically sophisticated. You know, remember South Africa, everything must fall. Fees fell, statue fell, all manner of things are falling, you know. So let us take the EndSARS protest as a significant milestone in Nigeria's political development. And yes, you are correct. The constituted power will always reinforce. We always gather together. We always find ways of policing the national political boundary. It is just to throw back a proverb at you. It is the democratic sovereign, the people, you know, that must always also find a way of, you know, going after the constituted power, you know, and snatching their flourishing from those who will not make it happen. So I don't think it's a failure at all. I think it's a very landmark event, political event in our democratic experiment. Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much, Prof. Let's take one of the written questions. What ways can we explore to develop mechanisms to deepen the commitment of the regular citizens to the pillars of public interest, justice, and good governance? That question is from Alade Julius Oloyede, who the other time couldn't ask his question directly. Prof, you have the floor. We're rounding off.
Thank you very much, sir. We noted part of this issue earlier on, that one of the things that I expected, for instance, before the fuel increase or the fuel subsidy removal the other time, and well, maybe it was a naive expectation, but that was that a government that is concerned about the social contract, that is concerned about the governed, must always ensure that there are proper deliberation about any policy before that policy is implemented. And such deliberations have become very easy in this age and time. There are pockets of public spheres, or what scholars have called public sphericals, the university, town hall meeting, social media handle, and on, where issues of policy design and policy conceptions can be negotiated. That is one way by which you can bring people, into any form of discussion. You can bring intellectual, you can bring academic, you can bring public intellect, you can bring all manner of people to come and speak. The government can provide its own set of people who will engage with others. You can have town hall meetings where you will have people, you can write memos, you can write petitions, you can write all sorts of things. These are the mechanisms that are available to us to reach out to government and to try to, change issues or have your input in what the government wants to do about your life. I hope I'm able to answer that question.
Thank you very much, Professor Folayan. May we also find out whether there are still more questions? We'll have about 6-7 more minutes to bring this opening session to a close. While that goes on, it is absolutely necessary to re-emphasize the imperative of identifying the pyramids of network that will work. Going back to what Professor Lampert said, so that it's not just about people at the top. We have to begin, from bottom up, and that way we are able to establish the pyramids, of networks and the hierarchies of values at the same time, so that we can have in the end a very, very systematic culture of protest, and one that is sophisticated, because actually protest can be frontal, protest can also be subtle, so that you at some point you don't even have to go to the streets to resist. And that's part of what the keynote speaker means by talking about a new Nigerian public that is becoming increasingly sophisticated. How do we do all this without building a very strong network of values, a very, very strong pyramids of network? And that is how we will push. The ambassador and plenipotentiary of Japan to Nigeria, will be joining us tomorrow. His speech will open the plenary, and so we would like to apologize that we could not bring that to us today. And while we do that, we would like to invite everybody back to join us tomorrow. Of course, before we call it a day, we would like to take some announcements. But in the meanwhile, it is necessary for me to, on behalf of the organizers, thank Professor Adesina immensely as we bring this keynote session to a close. And that is what it means. I thought I knew him. I thought he was my friend, because he will always find a way of inviting me to share some makara and amala and all that, and then we will laugh. And we thought everything was simple, but with the dimension we had today, that it takes a lot of depth to be a philosopher. You also know why, in the end, whether you are in engineering or medicine or wherever, the highest degree you eventually take is a degree in philosophy. So he's reminded us that that field is the father of all fields, given the way he has handled this topic. And like I told us at the beginning, it is a keynote, and you'll agree with me that he's already opened the doors to our discussion over the next couple of days. Sir, we would like to thank you once again for that incredible keynote. At this point, it is my pleasure to bid Professor Adesina farewell while we invite our official announcer to tell us where we go from here. It is an online event, but I'm sure that we can also have our online meal. So, Mr. Segun Orimakinde, you have the floor.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, all protocols observed. Thank you, Professor Afolayan. Thank you, Dr. Senayo, and all the people that are present, everybody that has attended today's event. What I'm going to announce is going to be about tomorrow, but before I proceed, I would love to invite the president to make some comments.
Thank you very much. Professor Afolayan, we thank you once again. I'm particularly coming in to thank Professor Senayo, who is in Germany. We had him on officially as our anchor for today, but we were not sure he would have landed or if he would have settled in. But those of us that we thought we were settled, we find that he is even much more settled and he didn't suffer any disconnection. So we want to thank you particularly for coming to the rescue.
Thank you.
Dr. Senayo Olaoluwa is the director of the Institute of African Studies of the University of Ibadan. We appreciate you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much. Tomorrow, the events, we're going to start the conference at 10 a.m. tomorrow. It's going to run from 10 a.m. to 2:30. Importantly, it is very important for us to make sure that all the presenters are ready for their presentation. And where you're having network issues or technical issues, please communicate with us via the association's email, or if you have our direct contacts, let us know the challenge you're having so that we can move on to the next presenter who is available in order to manage our time well. So a little adjustment for tomorrow as well. We are going to be taking the ambassador's speech tomorrow during the program. So the timing is going to be communicated to us when we start the first panel tomorrow. We have two panels. So we are going to have a break in between the two panels. We just want to enjoin our people to make sure that even if you have presented or you are yet to present, don't just target coming online during your own paper presentation. It's very important that a part of the entire process, everything going on, so that you can contribute to the outcome of the conference. These are deliberations from different fields and different perspectives, and they are going to be helpful in improving your own paper, the final outcome of your presentation. So it's very important that we attend from beginning to the end. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending today. Before we call it a day, I will invite the president again to give us the final address. Thank you.
Well, it's actually not an address. I would just want to say that we should put on our cameras so that we can see everyone's faces, so that we can have a group photograph. So put on your camera. So we just take the pictures. Okay. So that we won't have blank spaces. Good. Okay. Ibrahim, I can't see you. Tolulokwe, Helen. Okay, except you want to sign up. Okay. Please put on your cameras. 1 minute. Okay. Then I'm going to page 2. Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Remarkide. You have the floor.
So we have come to the end of today's session. We have come to the end of today's session. Please let us be on time tomorrow so that we can start as and when due. Today we missed the mark for starting by a few minutes. We'd love to start on time tomorrow so that we can respect people's time and we can keep to the schedule. Thank you so much, everybody. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow.
Yeah, see you tomorrow.
So we are going to leave the floor open.
Thank you.
You can have the floor now if you want to catch up for a few minutes before we end the meeting.
All right, thank you very much for that.
Everyone.
Well, June. Professor Folayan Abi. Oh, serious.
No, bad boy.
Abe Baoni, you are good.
June.
Baoni. Yeah, good.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, you're good.
Thank you, sir.
Reverend, good to see you. Mr. Wycliffe.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning. Morning, sir.
It's afternoon now. Good afternoon, sir.
All right, good afternoon, sir. Yeah. Dr. Senayo, good morning, sir.
Yeah, you're good, sir. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too, sir.
Yeah, how is Liberia?
We're doing small, as they say here. They call it small here.
Yeah, that's good. It's good to do small.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, good to see you, everyone. Madam President, congratulations. Great job.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Madam President, congratulations.
Thank you.
Dr. Charles. Good to see you again.
Show your face.
Dr. Charles.
Good day,
Dr. Kishete.
I show you my salute, sir.
Yeah, you're good.
Good to see you, Dr. Smayo.
Yeah,
you have abandoned your younger brother. So nice, sir.
Koribenya at all. My younger
Reverend, I cite you from Liberia.
Just
although your name is June Badamosi.
Just use my my WhatsApp number and
all right. Okay, I will reach out to you through that, sir.
All right.
Thank you so much, sir, for the wonderful way you hosted today's event. It was really, really nice. Very warm.
All right. See you, everybody.
Okay, see you. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh.